Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Urban Village Development Commission meeting of Tuesday, June 21st, 2016, second day of summer, apparently. We're going to have some background music today, and so please speak up. And I'd like to respectfully request that nobody tell us what the soccer score is, because some of us want to watch it after this meeting. We're going to go ahead and start with the approval of minutes. Did everyone get a chance to see the minutes and take a look at them from June 7th, I believe it was? Any comments, edits, questions?
There were minutes in our packet, actually.
Yeah, there weren't actually
any minutes in the packet.
There were no minutes in the packet.
Okay, well, we'll find out what happened.
We sat
So we
through,
did not see
through
them.
training mostly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why.
I know what happened.
That's why.
We didn't have a recording secretary that time
Tonight.
either, and we sent part of it off, and I guess the rest of the people didn't complete their part, so I'll find out what
So
happened.
we'll table that for now.
Yeah.
And then go ahead and move on to the agenda items. But before we start,
Oh.
yes.
So a couple of things. One, I want to finish well, there's one more new member who may not be here tonight, but we have Michelle Kemper is a new member who was not at the last meeting. So welcome, Michelle.
Thank you.
And
So we have all of our regular members here tonight, so
Yes.
welcome. First meeting of all of us, so good to have you. And also Ski as our lone alternate tonight, although vacant is here as well, so. Are we trying to fill that, by the way?
No,
Okay, we're not trying to fill that. Okay.
we have alternates to fill in
If we need to.
Right.
Okay, great. So Lucy was going to start us off with a little bit of training. She promised me 10 minutes.
So last time our training went kind of long, so we saved, let's see, is this the right one? So this one is just kind of more specific to what you do and your purview and the kind of permits you review. There are basically three types of permits or activities that you guys have. One is a site development permit, which is a land use permit, or SDP. Another is a preliminary plat, which is also a land use permit, and a development agreement. And there are many kinds of development agreements that the city does. These are development agreements to set up an urban village like Tallis or Issaquah Highlands. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about how the process works at the commission. So first, I want to just say some things about the difference between what a preliminary plat and a site development permit is. A preliminary plat, an example of which is shown on the left, is the subdivision of land. And so with a preliminary plat, you have the preliminary one, and then they build and design certain aspects of it, and then they final plat it, which is what is recorded with the county, and you can go and find legal descriptions, and that makes it actual, that's the actual division of land. So mostly what you're reviewing is the parcels, lots, tracts. Are they appropriately sized and shaped for the uses and requirements? You're generally not reviewing what's on them. So, you know, if it's a single family house, you're not seeing the house on it. If it's going to be a multifamily parcel, or you may not even know what the use is. And that's all right, except when we're reviewing for certain kinds of uses. So obviously a tract for a road has to be big enough for the road that's going to go in it. You may look at a park in terms of its location, or does it look big enough to contain the kinds of activities that would be appropriate for the lots and parcels in the rest of the plat. With a site development permit, you're looking at the actual design. So this is an example on the right. So you're not just looking, the parcels have already been created, and what you're looking at is there a plaza? Is there a multifamily building? Where's the parking going? How are each of the pieces that are proposed? Are they designed per code? Do they make sense with the guidelines? Do they work well together? Do they create a pedestrian-friendly environment and such? And the staff report is there to help you understand from a staff's perspective whether the proposal complies or not. So I just wanted to, this chart is a little bit of a summary of the big 11 by 17 chart that you have. So generally, a site development permit comes to you if it's over 3 acres, except in Raleigh, and it's over 150,000 square feet. Under that size is administrative, meaning the staff makes the decision. There's public comment with both, but the decision maker is different. With a preliminary plat, you're dividing more than 4 parcels. So state law allows you to divide property up to 9 parcels administratively. The city has decided that 4 is the maximum that they're comfortable with. It may change in the future. And so anything that's 5 or more parcels comes to a commission or a hearing examiner for additional review. And a development agreement comes to you because the council has agreed to create a new urban village. And so you're the sort of first body to review the proposal and the regulations. You're the decision maker on a site development permit. Other people are decision makers on plats and development agreements. One of the key pieces that Jim Haney talked about last time is the quasi-judicial piece, that you're acting like a court when you're doing either a preliminary plat or a site development permit. So since tonight is a site development permit and you're a decision maker, we will go through those questions in a minute, specifically related to this proposal. Generally, you're looking for compliance with the codes that are in place. Technical reviews and architectural reviews are done by others. Staff or technical experts that we ask to, do a peer review technical pieces. The architectural element in all the urban villages is reviewed by a private architectural review committee that each of the urban villages sets up for themselves. If you have questions, feel free to stop me. So let's talk a little bit about how the process works. This is just a very kind of high-level view of how the sort of progression. First, staff and the applicant have sort of an informal process where we meet each other and we collaborate, working in sort of a big picture way to get things in good shape. Then we go into a more structured review. The first step is what we call a pre-app meeting, where they submit a set of required drawings and information, and all the staff, all the reviewing departments in the city take a look at it and give them comments. Then they make their formal site development permit or plat submittal. We review that and write a staff report, and that goes to you. And then you do your review, and then you either issue a notice of decision or a notice of recommendation, depending on whether it's going to someone else or you're the decision maker. Have I lost everyone yet? Okay. You guys,
Yes, Carl.
you already know.
What?
So the part that I want to focus on tonight is the part in the kind of orange square, these 3 pieces, because that's the piece where you guys have the most role. The staff report is issued about a week before the commission meeting. This is Development Commission. You're a kind of development commission, but Urban Village Development Commission. We basically have several pieces that take place. Tonight is the first meeting where we introduce you to the project, both the staff and the applicant. You'll have an opportunity to ask questions. The public will have an opportunity to ask questions. We will gather the questions, concerns, comments, and we will go away and prepare what is very creatively called a briefing response memo. And we will try to answer those questions and comments. So we may add new conditions, we may edit conditions, we may provide additional information, and you'll get a response from both the applicant and the staff. And then we'll come back for a public hearing, and the staff and applicant will make another presentation. The public will have a chance to comment, and you'll have a chance to discuss and vote. Once that's done, we're required to prepare a kind of formal document that contains findings and conclusions, and that's either the notice of recommendation or notice of decision, which summarizes all the work that we and you have done. And then you usually are voting for the chairperson to be authorized to sign that document. And that either sends it off to the decision-making body or starts the appeal period. Okay? And there are a whole series of development agreements. Every one but the Issaquah Highlands development agreement is available online. The reason that one has not been put online is we have done so many modifications and interpretations that it is not a very accurate document. So we tend to work with the applicants, but we're happy to provide pieces to you guys, and we certainly quote that and refer to it in the staff report. If there are pieces that you feel that you need to know more about, feel free to ask us, and we'll make sure you get that information. So that's piece one. Oops, that's the same one. All right, so then for tonight's hearing, I'm going to just run, this is what it looks like. I have already covered most of this material in my previous presentation, but I just want you to see what the kind of structure of what we'll do at each one of these meetings is. So I'll explain that this is a site development permit, why it's coming to you, that your role is as a decision maker, and that it's a quasi-judicial matter. Run through sort of what your purview is and what your purview isn't. Explain the difference between a plat and a site development permit. We reuse slides a lot. And then we'll get to the quasi-judicial piece. So this should look very familiar. Jim and I use basically the same slides. So in a quasi-judicial matter, you are acting like a court, which means that you'll have hearing, you'll hear evidence, and that the proceedings have to be fair and appear fair. So there are two sort of key pieces to creating that appearance of fairness. One is procedural due process, which is about the procedures, and substantive due process, or the substance. So to meet the procedural requirements, we have to follow a certain process. Mostly that's around notice. We need to publish it in the newspaper, send out notices of application and hearing to neighbors within 300 feet, put a sign on the site that has the information, and all of that is to give everyone a fair opportunity to come and comment. And then the piece for you, and that's all on staff, but the piece for you is that we will ask you a series of questions to make sure that everyone understands whether you have any relationship with any of the people who are involved in this application. In terms of the substantive due process, the key pieces are that the adopted code is the basis for your decision, and that your conditions are reasonable and related to the impacts that are created by the project. So what I'd like you to do is read the questions, and then I'm going to ask you some questions. So how many of you would answer no to all of these questions? How many of you would answer yes to some of these questions? Okay. Can you identify?
Second to last, I own a house in Issaquah Highlands.
Okay.
Not very close to this, and I know nothing about this particular development.
Okay. Carl?
Same thing, relatively close, in the brownstones across the road from that.
Okay. Scott?
I'm also a resident of the Issaquah Highlands, up at the top of the hill.
Okay. Then the second piece has to do with the kinds of contacts that you may or may not have had. An ex parte contact are those that happen outside of the hearing between a decision maker and an opponent or proponent for the land use action. Has anyone had any contacts with neighbors or the applicant or anyone associated with this? No. Okay. And does anyone have a reason to challenge anyone who is a decision maker tonight? Okay.
All right, thank you, Lucy.
Yep.
Are there any questions for Lucy before we move on? Okay, great. Let's go ahead and introduce Mike Martin to talk about Westridge Townhomes, our SVP for the evening. Good job. Timing, Lucy.
Is that enough?
Close.
Good evening. My name is Mike Martin. I am an associate planner with the city, and I am the project planner for tonight's presentation of the Westridge Townhomes I site development permit. Nice to see some new faces on the commission and have some music tonight.
Apparently not the old faces, though.
Oh, well, the old faces are nice
Just the new
too.
faces.
Just checking, Mike. You know.
It's okay, I couldn't hear you anyway with this music blaring behind me.
Okay, I'll be sure to speak up there. Just to piggyback a little bit off what Lucy said, this is 2 meetings process, so we'll meet tonight. We're going to introduce this project. You have an opportunity to ask questions, clarifying situations, anything like that. And then we'll meet in about a month where we will hopefully render a decision. So tonight, feel free to interrupt me and ask questions along the way if you have them. And I'm just going to give you a kind of a high-level overview of the project. And then we'll open up public discussion and commission discussion. So this first slide is just to provide a little bit of context as to the location of the project. Can you guys see that in the red there? I think that shows up for you. But I had our person today draw that up and overlay the buildings into the former Microsoft parcel that you see there to the north, and that's this larger expanse of land. But today's project's right here. It's 8.55 acres, and it's 22 buildings and 109 units. These will be townhome condominium units. So this is a single piece of property, or will be, and I'll get to that piece in a minute. Form-wise, for those of you that are familiar with the brownstones, the building type, the massing will be the same. I cannot speak to the architecture. That I think the applicant's thinking something completely different than that, but just in terms of the layout and feel of the buildings, it's going to be those 4, 5, 6 unit buildings. In many ways, it does kind of reflect the brownstones layout. Again, 8.55 acre site. These buildings will be 3 to 4 stories. Traditional townscape neighborhood type, similar to many other projects in the immediate vicinity. Those tend to be traditional townscape. Here's just a bit of a closer look at that same plan I just showed. And on the next slide, I'll kind of walk through this pedestrian and vehicular circulation. Starting with the ped circulation, everything in red will be a traditional sidewalk. So the inner red loop, which is this, the inner red perimeter loop will be bounding the project site. That will be constructed when this project builds out. Additionally, because they need to build out the entirety of the streets, the sidewalks on the opposite side will be built out. It's possible that they could be reconfigured later as projects come down the road, curb cuts and such, but to start out, we'll have complete streets with sidewalks on both sides, connecting down to Discovery at the south here from 7th. That hooks up with Discovery right north of Swedish Hospital. Ellis will continue over to 9th Avenue, and then Ellis will continue down to High Street, and I can show you a closer drawing of that in a moment. The green line going through the middle is a new facility that, to my knowledge, y'all haven't seen. It's a feature pedestrian way, which is a a pedestrian facility in the development agreement that is a little bit different than a traditional neighborhood trail or a neighborhood walk. It's something bigger, it's something better, it's wider, and I have a slide on that in a moment that we'll talk a little bit more about the details. And then lastly, there are 4 buildings that do not front onto a street, and so they need to have a neighborhood walk to provide access to their buildings. And those are shown with this black dotted line here. Those will be neighborhood trails, and it's these buildings.
Mike, are the sidewalks, are they curbed sidewalks?
I'm sorry?
Are they curbed sidewalks?
Yes, yeah. Well, that's a great point, and I'll go a little bit deeper in a moment. All of the sidewalks on the exterior are traditional sidewalks. And now that you say that, this drawing probably isn't the best drawing because these 2 north streets, Road I and Road G, are character streets. And I'll talk a little bit more about the detailing of those in a moment. Those are flush. They do not have curbs. And I have a slide that'll detail that, but I guess I should have indicated that. Good point. In my defense, I'm on vacation, and I made this earlier today.
If you think being home with children full-time is a vacation.
Yeah.
And working.
This is a snippet I pulled out of your packet, and if you'd like to know the page, I can find it. I didn't indicate here. But this is one little piece of the feature pedestrian way, and it's just kind of a closer snapshot to give you an idea of the concept. Again, anything we're seeing in the drawings today is not what is approved. It's conceptual level to give you an idea of the type of features that might be included. As you can see, you have a wider hardscape surface. The feature pedestrian way utilizes a higher brand of concrete, usually something that's colored or stamped or scored, something that kind of sets it apart from a regular trail or a sidewalk. And then you'll see, this also shows kind of one of the raised crosswalks. This particular site development permit has a lot of north-south vehicular traffic. So we have those raised, or actually they may not be raised, but there'll be special colors or features to indicate the pedestrian priority all the way through the feature pedestrian way. I'm going to take a step back again. So what you're going to have is this feature pedestrian way running all the way through the center of the site. I think it'll be a really interesting feature and something different than what we've seen. The closest thing in the area is probably the plaza at the brownstones, but this is a little bit different than that. But it really is something that gives you good ped access through the center of the site, and then that terminates at the open space local park, which I'll discuss in a moment.
Mike?
Yeah.
Real quick, is that intended to be pedestrian only, or is it pedestrian bicycles, or what?
The primary intent is pedestrian only. I think we expect bicycles to be on it. It's not predominant, it's not identified as a bicycle facility, but it's kind of, because there's good continuity all the way through. It won't be like you walk through a piece and then it breaks up. It's going to have a feel that you have the full continuity. So it should be inviting to all different types of users and modes. Just a little bit more on the feature pedestrian way. Again, it's minimum 8 feet wide and minimum 8 to 16 foot wide landscape and hardscape borders. So that's substantially more than, you know, a neighborhood trail, which we might have seen through there. Vehicular circulation. I'm going to jump back quickly. Well, there's 2 street types proposed with this site development permit. There's the character street and the sub-collector street. Everything around the outside, the perimeter, you can think of it, Ellis, Road C here, Road D, Road B, and 7th Avenue are all sub-collector 1. Again, Roads G and Roads I are the character street, and additionally, we have some 18-foot wide alleys a la brownstones that will provide primarily vehicular access to the garages of the units. Also, things like garbage service will be serviced through those alleys.
Mike, you said a la brownstones. Is that indeed the size of the brownstone alleys?
Yes, so it's the same alley section, which is the 3-foot wide concrete shiners on either side with a 12-foot wide asphalt surface down the middle. The whole thing's drivable, but it gives you the feel that it's a little bit tighter. So knowing that, so the character street on the left, and this is not a standard that was in the Issaquah Highlands Development Agreement previously. There is a tool in the development agreement that allows an applicant to propose to elect standards from other development agreements. And in this case, the applicant proposed the character street and went through the process with the master developer to formalize the election and bring that standard into the development agreement. So now we have a character street. And just a brief summary of a character street. Actually, let me jump to the photos. I hope those show up. Here's a few examples of character streets, and these are provided in your packet, but what jumps out when you look at this is it's all at grade. There's no sidewalks per se in the sense that there's no elevated sidewalks. The pedestrian and vehicular facilities are all on the same grade. That's not necessarily to say that they're in the same zone. The PED facilities are separate from the vehicular facilities, and you can kind of see that here. In this instance, they have a different color. In this instance, there's landscape and vertical hardscape features that kind of separate. You have some parking bays here. This is the type of feel that we're aiming for with this project and these character streets. Something that we haven't seen in the Highlands should be, I'll try not to dispose my personal opinion, but I think it's a great opportunity, and I'm excited for something different, and we'll see how it turns out. I'm really hopeful. And then just this aerial view of the plan view. The section on this down below is a 10-foot wide PED zone, which also integrates the landscape hardscape. So in this drawing over here, you have 10 feet clear with the street trees and grates, and there will be some vertical features that aren't shown on this. And then on the opposite side, you have parking. And the parking, one thing you need to know, there's an administrative minor modification pending for this street because the way it's proposed is not exactly consistent with the adopted standard, which has optional parking. I think this was a bit in response to comments from the commission and comments we've heard from the public in the past that some projects could do a better job providing visitor parking. And I have a little bit more about parking in a moment, but there was a modification to allow parking to be kind of integrated into the PED hardscape landscape zone on one side of the character streets. And that alternates as you move north to south. And I know that's a lot of information, so if you need clarification, let me know. But the long story short is that the character streets will have parking on one side of the street. They add an additional 29 parking stalls to the project, which I think will be good for visitors because most of the parking, well, I'll save my spiel on parking until I get to that slide.
Mike, are the character streets intended to be one-way?
No, they're two-way. So they're two-way, they're really PED focused, and they have a lot of stuff going on. So they're gonna have landscaping, they're gonna have vertical hardscape, they're gonna have street lights, they could have art. I mean, they're intended to be inviting to the pedestrian. In this drawing, there's some pedestrian nodes here that were added to kind of give a bigger welcoming feel to the street. So there's some hardscape features here with some benches potentially or something of that sort.
Mike, I have a question. So the character streets, it's not intended that the trash collection would go down those streets? They go down the alleys?
Correct, yeah. There wouldn't typically be that type of service on the character street. And it works better for those type of vehicles, utility vehicles or vehicles like a trash truck when they're not navigating parking on street. So in the alleys, all of the alleys will be no parking So theoretically, they should have an 18-foot clear surface to drive without any obstruction. And then taking a look at the sub-collector 1 street, this is not really different than most of the streets in the Highlands. The section is a 5-foot sidewalk, a 4-foot planter, typical of what we see. And then, I'm not sure that. Well, the travel lanes are 10 feet wide, and that's the second administrative minor modification. And working with our Public Works Engineering Department, they really felt that they needed to make these sub-collector streets a foot wide, the travel lanes 1 foot wider, given some of the adjacent traffic generators and volumes that might be expected on these streets. So these will be 10 feet wide with on-street parking on both sides for a 52-foot wide section. And I can show you what that looks like on an overall plan. Well, this kind of gives you an idea of the scale and also the parking. So I'll just start talking about parking right now. All of the sub-collector 1 streets around the perimeter will have parking on both sides. So this project is going to have a lot of on-street parking, a lot. You can see all of these orange vehicles indicating the on-street parking. These are the character streets that show some of the parking. You can see how that alternates. So on this north side of the feature pedestrian way, the parking's on one side. On the south, it's on the opposite. And then additionally, all of the units will have at least 2, and most will have 4 private parking spaces, 2 in the garages and then 2 on the driveway aprons, which are a minimum 18 feet. There are a couple that, like, I don't know how well you can see this, but like this one here, for example, it's a smaller unit, it's a more narrow unit, so it only has 2. Excuse me. There's 109 units, and each unit's required to have 2 stalls, so the minimum requirement here is 218. When it's all said and done, there's 441, so it's 200% of the minimum. So I don't think parking's really a concern, at least in terms of quantity for this project.
Mike?
Yeah.
Yes, a couple questions. First of all, I appreciate that parking seems ample relative to other projects we've seen, and I read through this and thought it was pretty good. I do worry a little bit about the tandem ones sometimes. If 2 people are living there, we know that most people don't use their tandems away, and that visitor parking is critical because some number, I'll say half, not scientifically, are used by residents who are...
We don't police those ones, no.
Right, but they're less than motivated for some reason to not park in their own spaces. So we know that those are used up, so that's cool. But my question that I tend to ask is, have these numbers included things like fire plugs and mailboxes and other utilities and so forth that might?
That's a great question, and I know that question came up for the Westridge South plat. And in that case, I went back and looked at that, and the number did reduce a fair bit. I think the numbers here are pretty accurate, and the reason is there's not a lot of curb cuts around the perimeter, which is where these parking stalls are located. So I don't think there's going to be a lot of encumbrances that would reduce that number greatly.
I'd like to see whatever comes to us have the accurate number relative to any fire hydrants and other things. And then along with that, I'll just make a comment that I've noticed in the Highlands now, there's at least 2 places that I'm aware of where the fire hydrant, there's no painted curb or anything, and people, I don't know if they just don't see the hydrant, which I know they do, because I saw one guy smack his door into it, but yet he still parked in front of it. People don't, if they don't see a red curb, they think it's okay to park there, and maybe it is, I don't know. But we need to identify those here and other places in the Highlands, but I'd like to get ahead of that one if we can.
Certainly. I'm happy in the briefing response to get you a number as close as possible. The final fire hydrant location isn't, I don't think, finalized yet, so it's hard to give you an exact number, but I can certainly give you as best I possibly can.
Thank you.
Mike, before you move on
Yeah.
with parking, did the analysis include any potential overflow from medical services and retail that's close by in terms of those visitors parking in this area?
It does not. And the reason that it does not is because the projects are treated on an individual basis, and each project on its own is required to provide its fair share of parking. I certainly hear the concern. I know at Swedish, they had some issues there, which has led to the new parking lot is that open yet?
I think this week.
That just opened this week, so that added another 300 or 400 stalls. The development agreement just requires residential units to provide 2 stalls per unit, so that's the basis for our review
Okay.
for this project. I certainly hear your concern in your question, though.
Just as a comment on that, in Tallis, the Timber Ridge visitors overflow into the neighboring community that's adjacent to Timber Ridge.
Thank you.
Can I just follow up with a question, Michelle?
Certainly.
Do you think that's because there's construction going on, or?
No, this occurred prior to the Phase 3.
Thank you.
Okay, my presentation's jumping all over the place here, so.
Yeah, can I actually back you up a little bit?
Yeah.
To the pedestrian, or the feature pedestrian way?
Yeah.
I think it's a great feature, and I know this is conceptual. I'm just wondering, in the areas where it crosses with the character streets and alleys,
Yeah.
is there going to be something that differentiates or tells people to slow down, and particularly if it's going to be biker friendly?
Yes, so that's the primary intent, and you can kind of see it here, that this is a scored out, this is a black and white image, but what indicates to the driver that it's a PED priority is that break in the asphalt or the character street. There'll be something different. It's going to be a different scoring pattern. It's going to be a different color. It's going to look and feel different, which is the indicator to the vehicle that it's not, that there's PED crossings there.
And we can include some pictures of different techniques that have been used in the urban villages, so you can see what it looks like.
And on that same thing, Mike, where these intersect with the alleys and the feature pedestrian, is there going to be blind spots on them corners where I can't tell on that conceptual if that's like at the trees where the corners of the intersections are? Are those going to be blind spots where?
Great question. I don't know the condition number off the top of my head, but there is a condition in there that talks about, the way that trees need to be limbed and certain features that are in proximity to a pedestrian crossing so that it's apparent that there's people walking there. It's something that typically gets reviewed during the construction permit. So when that happens, we'll look at it to make sure that there aren't any conflicts. In addition, we'll look at the site distances. Our engineers look at that to make sure that there aren't any conflicts. Great question.
Hey, Mike, since we're on the pedestrian way, I'm going
Yeah.
to jump in. There's an easement for the public right-of-way, but since this pedestrian way doesn't actually extend through the property, I was curious how you guys intend for the public to go. When you go back to kind of the larger slide of how, I'm curious how, when people are coming down Ellis, whether they're on foot or with a dog, family, stroller, bike, how you intend for them to be cutting through this community, since there is a public easement and there seems to be an indication from the public that they do go through this space. There's this notion of using it as a trail. Since we only have it down this line and it kind of stops, I was curious how the city actually sees the path extending to the road.
Okay. So let me try to unpack your question there. So
The Dash Neighborhood Trail is going to be significantly smaller than our featured pedestrian way.
correct, but it's
That's our
going to
link.
be at a minimum the same width as the public sidewalks around the perimeter.
Okay.
And it's not like a soft surface, it's concrete. It's going to feel like a typical sidewalk. it certainly is not intended to prohibit the public. In fact, we want to invite the public, especially since the reason that that is there is because all residences in the urban villages have to have a primary pedestrian facility serving their front door, and that's why that's there. So it's absolutely intended to be public. There will be public access easements across every trail that's on private property in this project. And to the extent that we can, we add elements to indicate to the public that it's a welcoming facility for them to engage.
And will it be easy for people coming down to be able to see that neighborhood trail as being their access through, rather than using, for instance, like a road?
Are you talking like right here?
Yeah, exactly, that dash line. Is that what the intent is for people to be able to continue
Yes.
on to go through that pedestrian way?
I think there's multiple options for someone that wants to experience this. They could come in up to the character streets. They could get to it that way from Ellis or Road D. They could get to it from here. Certainly, this is the open space park, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. And then one of the conditions is that there's like a focal termini feature at either end of this feature pedestrian way to further express that it's a public facility. If your concern is that this is going to feel closed off and people aren't going to be aware of it, I don't think that you should be worried about that.
Excellent.
Can you just provide an example photograph, not of the feature pedestrian way, because we don't have those in Issaquah Highlands, but we do have neighborhood trails, and you can provide samples, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure.
And it wouldn't be a bad idea. I mean, there are pictures in either the trail standards or the guidelines of feature pedestrian ways, so we can provide some sample photographs. And I think that's a good thing, just to make sure we're all talking about the same thing.
Okay. So we've talked about parking. Let's talk about the local park. And that's the official term in the development agreement. This one fits the criteria for a local park, which is kind of it's not a pocket park. It's not a vest pocket park. It's not Central Park, but it's something in between. This particular park space that's being provided is 1 acre, so it's ample. The image here was provided by the applicant and is in the staff report. I don't think that's what we're going to see to a T. I think it's a place to start a discussion. And there's a little note down there that says see condition 53, which I'll read in a moment. But basically that condition says that this is not approved. And the reason it's not approved is we want to bring it to the UVDC to get your input and hear about some of the features that you might want to see there. Certainly there are features in the local park standard that fit the criteria for the park. But the nice thing about parks is that it is one thing that you as commissioners can really impact. So you should really be thinking about how you want that park to feel. The way they show it, I think they show a lot of the things that the standard requires or suggests. I'm not sure that requires is the right word, but you can see some of the samplings of things that the applicant has shown, which are all consistent with the type of facilities in a local park. So we can talk a little bit more about that. Do we want to talk about the local park now, or would you like me to read the unique conditions? And just about the unique conditions for the new commissioners. So in the Issaquah Highlands, it's our oldest development agreement, and it's certainly not our best one in terms of, it was the first one, I'll just put it that way. So the staff reports at the Issaquah Highlands tend to have more conditions than some of the other parts of the city. And for that reason, there's a lot of boilerplate conditions that I don't want to berate you with tonight. So typically what we do is I just read you the ones that are kind of really not generic and are specific to this project or whatever the project is at hand, and that's these here. And I'll read those in a moment, or I can read them now. Do we
Might as
want
well
to
go
talk about the park?
Might as well go through them now. I think we'll probably have lots of questions on others.
Okay, yeah, let's do it.
I'm under council.
You're in a different one, okay.
Yeah, sorry, I messed you up.
Last time I got tripped up, so I printed them out so we can all read them together. Can you read those?
Yes.
Because I am going to, okay. I'll try to jam through these as quick as I can, but it is important that you hear them. So number 3, short plat file number SP161 must be formally approved by the Development Services Department, and the drawings must be recorded with King County. Construction permits shall not be issued prior to approval, recording, and conclusion of the appeal period of the short plat. Additionally, no construction permits shall be issued until all access and construction easements necessary on adjacent properties are recorded with King County. And actually, I think the way I want to do this is just give a little explanation after each one where appropriate. So that condition has to do with the fact that, unlike the preliminary plat that I presented last time, this one is on a large parcel of land, and the city is currently reviewing a short plat to parcel out the subject property. And that condition just says that no future permits will be issued until that short plat is executed and the appeal period is complete. Number 24, the curb returns that represent the extensions of Road B and Road C to the north will not be constructed until those properties to the north have been processed through a suitable land use permit. Ellis Drive must be constructed without curb returns in those locations unless the appropriate land use actions have been completed, which ensure those extensions will be used, and the curb line must be continuous through the site. The northern right-of-way of Ellis must be coincident with the northern property line so that the extensions can be completed by others in the future if appropriate. That one's just getting at, Polygon doesn't own all of the property. There's an a different adjacent property owner, so this condition's just ensuring that as the future parcels develop around it, that everything lines up and that there aren't any conflicts. 25, the southern
Mike.
right-of-way.
Mike, sorry, can you just clarify curb return?
Yeah, curb return is just kind of like the curved part of a curb. Right? What? Throat. The throat of the road.
So where you have an intersection, you know, they don't meet at a 90-degree angle, it has those curves, and we just don't want to presuppose your decision-making before it's happened.
25, the southern right-of-way of Road D must be coincident with the southern property line so that Road B and Road C can be extended in the future by others if appropriate. These extensions will be reviewed and enabled by other future land use permits and are not a requirement of this land use action. Again, that's just getting back, putting all the tools in place to make sure that as the adjacent parcels build out, that any conflicts are addressed prior to that so that everything matches up.
Could you provide us with a visual representation of Road B and C for reference?
Certainly. So they're labeled here.
And the indication of that last condition was to the north, I'm assuming? Is that the call-out? That portion there?
Yeah, so you can see the curb returns here. This portion isn't going to be constructed with this project. So this is just saying that they have to have the easements in place so that when that builds out, everything is set up so that it matches.
Okay, great, thank you.
these are, these conditions are very, I don't know what the word is, but technical. 26, prior to approval of utility permits, roads C and D in the extension of 7th Avenue Northeast must be either located entirely within the boundary of this land use action, or the applicant must furnish an easement or other instrument which allows the roadway to be accepted as encumbered right-of-way following roadway completion and acceptance. This is another condition in the same vein of the ones I just read. If you have questions, let me know. 27, prior to utility permit approval, the applicant must develop a suitable lane transition plan that accommodates the intersection of Ellis Drive with 9th Avenue Northeast, safely transitions to a 2-lane sub-collector 1 standard, and preserves the available traffic capacity in the couplet on Highlands Drive and Northeast 9th Avenue. And let me show you what that one is. Oops. Okay, this one kind of shows it. Well, no, it doesn't. Okay.
What about the aerial?
Oh, good call. Ah, perfect. Okay. So what this condition's getting at is the way that Ellis is constructed right now, and this north corner right here is the Safeway fuel station's right here. Safeway is right here. That's a wider road than what will ultimately be provided with this. So that's saying that this piece right here, they have to work through the construction permitting process to resolve that and figure out how those lanes are going to come together. I don't think we have that answer yet, and it's something that our engineers and the applicant's engineers will work together to figure out. Okay, there's not too many more. I think we're halfway. 28, the section of Northeast Ellis Drive between Road B and Northeast High Street shall be evaluated at the time of utility permit to determine if on-street parking is appropriate based on the final intersection configuration and road grade. So this one, Northeast High Street going into West Highlands Park right now, there's a road connection proposed right there, and this doesn't show grades, but there's a decent grade change right here. So this section of road will be, I think, between 12 and 15%, relatively steep. So this condition is stating that we need to wait and see what that final configuration looks like before we can determine if on-street parking is acceptable at that location.
Mike, are those included in the numbers you shared with us earlier, the parking?
I do not believe so, but when I provide you with your crystal clear explanation, I'll make sure that it's accurate. I don't believe they are.
Thank you.
Twenty 29, prior to approval of the utility permit, the applicant must deliver to the city an easement or other legal instrument which allows the roadway crossing Lot B to be constructed, converted to right-of-way, and owned, operated, and maintained by the city as conventional right-of-way. Again, I think that condition's pretty straightforward, but it's in the same vein as those earlier ones that I read. 30, prior to approval of utility permits, the intersection of Northeast High Street and Northeast Ellis Drive will be modified so that there is an obvious through route with right-of-way priority and an obvious side route. This may be accomplished by modifying the geometry to resemble a conventional T-type intersection or by other creative means to prevent driver confusion over which lane has right-of-way. This condition may not be met by signage. So this one, that's this intersection. The way it's shown right here, it doesn't really clearly indicate which street has the priority and which doesn't. So this is going to need to be reconfigured with an engineering analysis so that that's a safe situation. Just jumping back and forth. Five more. Sorry, these are taking a while. 31, the character streets, roads G and I shall be designed using vertical elements, example, planter, bollards, streetlights, etc., but not curbs as shown. I think in the plan set that we had, they did show vertical curbs, so that's the reason for this condition. As I explained earlier, those character streets will all be flush. I'll just start over again. The character streets, roads G and I shall be designed using vertical elements, example, planter, bollards, streetlights, etc., but not curbs as shown, and changes in the paving material, color, and/or texture to define the pedestrian and vehicle zones. Concrete or other non-asphalt paving materials must be used. The character streets will be evaluated at the time of utility permit review to determine if street cuts or driveway cuts shall be used. I think that's one of the final pieces that we need to do a little bit more work to understand if driveways make better sense intersecting with the subcollector streets or if traditional curb cuts make better sense. We haven't analyzed it enough yet to decide which one we prefer. 41, to accommodate architectural features consistent with the goals and guidelines. Buildings with leftover landscape areas between the building ends and the sidewalk or trail shall extend appropriate building elements towards the street. I think I have an example of that. Well, I'm going to read 42 because they're kind of connected. And then 42, the end units of buildings which face a street or trails, I'll correct that, shall be designed with features that provide differentiation such as varied types of colors, materials, and architectural embellishments such as windows, shutters, porches, private courtyards, patios, etc. This condition applies to all buildings.
So my clarifying question on that one.
Yep.
So we open that statement with end units.
Yeah.
And the final statement is this condition applies to all buildings.
Yeah, allow me to clarify.
Thank you.
And actually, in your packet, on page 27, if you turn to that page in your packet, that'll kind of assist with my explanation here.
Your 27 or the 27 of the packet?
Actually, page 35 of 81. Thank you, Lucy. So this image kind of depicts what these two conditions are getting at. And let me take a step back. As you can see in this drawing, all of the streets, virtually all the buildings with the exception of these four which front onto this park, have their primary frontage onto one of these north-south oriented streets. The reason for this condition is that this project also has exceptional visual prominence from the perimeter streets. So this unit, as you can see on that drawing on page 35, and I apologize, or I don't know if yours are in color, but on almost all those buildings, the end building is highlighted because those building ends, and those are units in the end of a building, which I think is the clarification, Scott. I hope that makes sense. Those buildings and those units specifically need additional treatment so that they don't read as just the side of a building from the perimeter streets. In many ways, all of these buildings have dual frontages. They have their true front, which is on to the character streets, and then they also have, in essence, their side, but because it's so prominent from the adjacent streets, those buildings really need to have additional architectural features so that they don't just look like a whitewash of the sides of a bunch of buildings.
Mike?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, Mike, on that page with that drawing, right where the text says Lot A, I don't know if, it's not showing up on your slide up there, but it's the, oh gosh, I don't know how to describe where it's at because there's no street number on it. But there's one corner one that is visible from the street that is not highlighted as needing that extra architectural feature. Just wondering if that was an oversight or if I'm reading the,
Are you talking about this one?
Go down.
Yeah,
that one and then the one right below it.
Yeah,
Go
that's
down
exactly my
about
question, too.
that one.
This one?
That one.
It seems to me both of those should be treated the same as others, just because they'll be visible. I realize they're on an alley, but it seems to me that they'd be visible from Ellis, for example.
Okay, I hear what you're saying.
Do
The
you-
reason the reason that they were excluded is because those ones won't have a strong visual. I mean, they won't appear as prominent as the others.
Let us take a look at them.
Yeah. Those are the only two?
Well, one of them is right on Northeast Ellis and the other one's a block off of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Those two stood out to me, exactly.
And it's probably more prominent to the one that's just to the west of that, so.
One
Okay.
other piece, and I don't know if I'm interrupting, Mike, but just for some of your newer members, Issaquah Highlands has these 3 neighborhood types, and they apply to the site design, the landscape design, and circulation design. And then on the Architectural Review Committee's behalf, it also impacts architectural character. And this is a traditional townscape neighborhood. That's the neighborhood type, which means buildings are supposed to be placed close to the streets. But where you have those diagonal streets, it's hard to get, a square building close. So that's why we're saying this is an opportunity to add a sunroom or a porch or some other element to bring the building closer to the street and to make that end more interesting and pleasant to look at.
Mike?
Yes.
What are we calling this, I think it's an alley, between Ellis Drive and the park? So, oh, there. Let's go up right there and to
This?
the left. No, that's
This?
Road F. Yeah, there, that road right there. What is that called?
It's an extension of, I guess, Alley F.
Is it, okay.
We'd have to look at the drawings to see if that one got its own letter, but in essence, it's the same treatment as the alley, so.
I was only asking because I was trying to figure out how to define where we were.
Oh.
And I didn't see a name on it, so.
Mike, while you're on this drawing, the green line, the feature pedestrian way,
Yes.
on different drawings, including this page 35 of 81 and some of the separates, it's marked as Wunderf in different areas.
Good eye. The reason for that is that when we started the negotiations before this was a Wunderf, and that's an oversight on my part for including that. We were kind of working at the 25th hour to get the latest and greatest drawings. So where it says Wunderf is inaccurate, it should be a feature pedestrian way.
Okay, it's in a couple of the drawings
Yeah.
too, so I just want to go scrub those.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. Okay.
Me too. Yeah.
2 more. 44, consider providing seat walls near the ends of the perimeter buildings where buildings are not close to sidewalks. They actually do show that in a couple of the drawings. And then lastly, 53, an application for an administrative site development permit must be submitted and the permit approved by the Development Services Department and the Issaquah Highlands Community Association prior to construction of any elements of the local park. And I talked about that one earlier.
Hey, Mike, can we back up to, let's see.
Drawings?
No, up here, it's one of the conditions. I think it might be 41. I guess it's just the wording that's throwing me off. I understand the idea, but it says buildings with leftover landscape, blah, 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 shall extend appropriate building elements toward the street. Is that right? Buildings shall extend appropriate building elements? Is that correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
like those sun porches I was describing,
Okay.
or
All
a
right.
covered terrace or something.
Buildings shall, okay. Just looked funny to me.
Would you like us to
No.
wordsmith it a little
No,
bit?
no, no.
Okay.
And just out of curiosity, how is condition 53 any different from what we typically do? Why is it called out as a unique condition?
So the key of that one is, so we're reviewing a site development permit today, and what we're saying is that because the drawings do not have the level of detail that we need to issue an approval here today or at the next meeting potentially, they need to go through an additional step and provide a fully detailed plan through an administrative site development permit.
Okay.
Really, it's an extra opportunity for the staff to make sure that they're hitting all of the things that they need to hit to make that park something great.
Perfect. Thanks for the clarification.
And sometimes it's also convenient for us that way because with landscape, the HOA, the Architectural Review Committee also has almost as much purview as we do, and so it's sometimes easier to do it as a collaborative review than a sequential review.
Hey, Mike, when
Yes.
we look at this again, is there a possibility that the applicant will have satisfied some of these conditions, or will this list most likely still look like this? I had these mixed feelings, because as I was going through this, I felt like there was these holes, and I'm like, good, we have these conditions to clarify these holes, but I sure would like to see some of it filled in. Is there a likelihood of some of these conditions starting to be met the next time we look at this?
If I was a betting man, and I'm not saying that I am or I'm not, I would guess that the applicant's already working on their construction drawings, and they've had these conditions now for a couple weeks, and they're starting to implement those changes into their construction drawings. So while they are working on it, we're not going to do another change to the site development permit drawings or conditions, so the conditions will remain. This is kind of the package that we're moving forward with. If we start changing the drawings after this, there's an opportunity to start missing things, and it requires a full re-review, which frankly, we don't have the resources to do. So to answer your question, the conditions aren't likely, we're not going to omit conditions based on any work that they may or may not be doing,
Thank you for
unfortunately.
clarifying.
Hey, Mike?
Is there something in particular you would want to see, Joel?
Well, I could give an example, but we're kind of going to be jumping ahead. I think we're about to get into an issue in this, which was like stormwater. So like one instance that I found was the applicant specifically mentions that he wants to use a particular flow meter, but Issaquah hasn't approved that. So the city says, well, you can apply and see, and maybe this will all line up. But so then as I'm curious why the applicant didn't go, cool, I'd like to go down that route. But at the same time, I'm now going to make a modification to my plan with something that is approved. So right now, there's just kind of this hole. And I looked at this and I go, I'm glad that you like, I think it was a thirsty duck. I'm glad that you like this. This is cool. I wish I had more information on why the applicant likes it, not really in my purview. But also now we kind of have this thing where I'm like, this is a pretty vital part of this property of looking at how we're going to be rerouting the storm water. And I'm curious what we're going to be using for it. But I realize that this example is just one of these kind of like these conditions, but that kind of launches us into stormwater we haven't addressed yet.
So I probably would defer technical questions on stormwater design to Dan Irvin, our engineer. I think the conditions are set up to show where the information that's presented to staff, for which I draft the staff report, where Dan and I draft the staff report, where there's inconsistencies. And I think in the thirsty duck example, and for those unfamiliar, a thirsty duck is a stormwater mechanism. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, when the water gets to a certain level, it floats into this thing and then drains out. And that particular tool is not approved at this time, but maybe in the future. So where the drawings are inconsistent, that type of suggestive information might be included in a staff report is a way to help the applicant. But at the end of the day, the conditions are there to give clarity to the applicant where they're inconsistent with codes and what they need to do to rectify that so that they can have a project that meets code and is approvable.
And you know, it's, what Mike said is kind of key here. We're not usually looking at construction level details, but you're right that sometimes construction things might ripple or impact other things in the site. Like if they couldn't do a stormwater vault, we'd have a big problem. So we're trying to strike a balance between staying at a land use level and setting them up well, you know, setting you up well so you know what you're approving and that they can actually build it, and setting them up well so that when they start on construction things, they know, great, you showed a thirsty duck, we may not be able to allow you to do that. So we're trying to strike a balance there. We have sometimes done, did we do separate construction conditions with this? Sometimes we put things in there because most of the time it's not really directly tied to the land use, but we're all starting to think about the next step, and we're trying to identify those things that we'd want everybody to know that will lead us well into the next step. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I appreciate it, and I also kind of want to adjust my expectation for when we have eyes on this again, rather than coming back and being like, there's still 53 conditions.
So, Mike, I'm sorry, if I could ask a question. You didn't touch on this, and maybe you're going to, but this future development block 3,
Oh, great, yeah.
I guess I'm not sure, a couple of things. One, on this drawing, I'm looking at the same page 35, it says 316,741 square feet. That doesn't seem accurate, because that, if my calculations are correct, that would be like 7 acres. Does that sound right? And the entire property is 8.5 acres?
Okay, yeah. You're talking about the figure underneath block 3?
Yeah.
Yeah, so disregard that. Because the short plat is not executed yet, that number is taking account a bigger parcel of land than just this project.
Okay, which then leads me to the question of what, I realize it's future development, and we're not going to be talking about it necessarily, but will it fall under the same rules, conditions, and everything as the rest of the property? If not, it's smaller than 3 acres, it will not come back to us? Is it, what should we expect there?
Great question. So the reason that block was left out is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Richard, with Polygon. Polygon owns a certain amount of residential entitlement.
Yep.
And for this particular bank of entitlement that they're constructing or proposing to construct these units under, I think this takes them right up to the limit. And then they will be constructing the remainder of this project and then projects adjacent out of a different bank. And they still need to do some things around that extra entitlement. So at the end of the day, they have at least 109 to be able to construct this, but they don't have 130 or whatever they would have needed to fill that out. But from what they've told us and from what we've seen, that will come back and they will just plug 4 buildings in there just as is, consistent with the rest of the buildings that we see.
Okay, so this is presuming that they will get additional entitlements, or that it will be part of a different development permit? And I guess what I'm wondering is, what's to prevent a developer from blocking off a piece of their land that wouldn't ever come back to us, that we would have no, oversight or authority on? And I'm not suggesting that they're doing that here. I realize there's a reason for it, but I do get concerned that there's this piece that we will have no visibility into. If I had the assurance that if they do develop it, it will fall under all of the other guidelines that we have for this particular one, then I'd feel much more comfortable. But if not, then I don't know what I'm looking at there.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
I think
why don't you let the applicant?
applicant would like to address this, so.
Go for it. Thanks, Richard.
Can you put up the big one? Hi, Rick. The one that we imported. excuse me, Richard Rawlings with Polygon Northwest, so maybe a little in advance of any other comments, but can you identify the area that you're thinking of? It actually shows buildings on it right now. It's right there. So that 4-building piece that you're concerned about, Jeff, is actually, when the short plat is recorded, is really a part of the piece north of Ellis. It's
Okay.
not an orphan
Okay.
sub 3-acre piece. And so you're kind of getting a glimpse of where we're headed in the future, but obviously we have to come back here and go through process, and likely the conditions will be very similar. We envision the community to be the same community essentially flowing.
Okay. So we'll see it with the other one, then it will be
Yeah.
tied to that, not a separate piece?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's fine. Thank you.
Do you want us to talk a little bit about the entitlement?
Yeah, that'd be great, if you can.
There's a thing called transfer of development rights, or TDRs. The city is a supporter of TDRs. They often are used or are created when property is preserved. So when Park Point was preserved, for instance, all of the entitlement was pulled off of that and put into, I think because the property was in foreclosure, there was a bank that actually ended up owning that. And those TDRs, some of those TDRs were purchased to create the WashDOT TDR development agreement, where Bellevue College and Sunridge and some of Pinecrest are now. So as part of preparing to develop their property, Polygon purchased 100 of the TDRs that were pulled off of Park Point when it was set aside as permanent open space. And so the city's control over that is that we establish sending sites, property that the development rights can be pulled off of, and receiving sites, sites that can accept additional density. Issaquah Highlands is a receiving site, so they're allowed to purchase 100 TDRs, which is what they purchased, and add them to their project. The thing is that because they weren't part of the original development agreement, we have to look at traffic, utilities, all those things that were already planned for in Issaquah Highlands, and say, is there enough capacity for these, or are there additional, is there additional infrastructure that's necessary? And we're in the process of working on that with them. And, but because we haven't finalized those negotiations, they weren't prepared to, they couldn't use that entitlement to fill out that last block.
Gotcha, thank you. Thanks for that. One quick question, 8.55 acres was brought up earlier. Does that include that one section, or
No.
does not include it?
It does not include the 4-pack here, but
Okay.
it does include the 1-acre park.
Okay, and how does that compare, just for my own benefit, to the brownstones? Do you remember what the acreage is on the brownstones, overall property?
Acreage on the brownstones.
Any
Oh,
idea?
man. I should know that.
I would guess it was a little smaller, but
Sorry?
172.
right.
172 versus 109, okay. Okay, thank you. So maybe 10 acres or so? Okay, thanks.
So in the interest of time, I'm going to wrap up my presentation now. I want to give the public an opportunity to speak. I want to give the applicant an opportunity to make a presentation if they have one, and then provide time for commission discussion. So I'll wrap up now, and Jeff, turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much. So before we get into discussion, I know we've asked a few questions already. I'd like to ask Mr. Rawlings if he has anything he wants to share. I think it'd be more beneficial to hear from you before the public speaks, because you may actually answer questions that they might have, and then we'll have a chance to respond or ask questions.
Yeah,
of it.
thank you.
Thank you.
No, as usual, Mike does a great job in explaining our projects and all projects.
You mind speaking up a little bit? This
Yep,
is really loud
sorry.
behind us.
Sorry.
Thanks.
I was just trying to give Mike a little kudos. I mean,
Yeah.
he does a bang-up job, and so I think I don't have anything to add other than we're very excited to get on with this next phase of a next neighborhood within the community. But I would like to know if you have specific questions after all that information that maybe I can answer. Architecturally speaking, we're kind of just getting started, if you will, just kind of kicking around concepts, and so we didn't really feel that it was the right time to come. And we'll be going in front of the ARC in the next 30, 60 days to kind of get that process going.
Do you think you'll have any preliminaries or conceptual things to show us at the next meeting?
Not by design, I guess, but we could bring some things. I just kind of caution that they're kind of early concepts, and
Yeah.
we'll need to work with the ARC to get.
Yeah, no, I understand. It always helps me to just sort of get an idea of generally what you're thinking, knowing that it's not really up to us to approve that or not.
They
So if
would
you
be
can, that'd
on
great.
a very similar scale. We plan to use essentially the same unit types that you see, the brownstone floor plans.
Okay.
But essentially skin the building differently, so you get a different, exterior architecture and neighborhood feel. But they'll be very similar in length, size, and so forth.
Well, if I could just throw something out, through my personal experience, not living there, but knowing people who do, and just and talking to people who are looking at them, I think, again, not knowing what you're doing and not knowing exactly what the grade is like, I think that the step-out patio or open space in front of the units seem to be the most popular ones and best used. So I love the idea of these porches, open spaces, and that sort of thing. So the more you can think of that, and the less just sort of a door to the sidewalk,
Right.
I think is
I
really
would say
valuable.
this will be very similar in that you'll have some units fronting on a park open space. It won't have the same kind of plaza, but again, we think the character street's going to kind of take a little place of that. So on one side of the street, you'll have those front patio opportunities, and on the other, it'll be more of a just like brownstones. You have the uphill building, and there might be 6 risers to get up into that building. On the lower side of the street, it might be 2 or 3, but we'll certainly be doing the same front patio kinds of configurations so that people can, hang out in the front and enjoy.
I think it'd be great. All right, do you guys mind if we listen to any public comment before we get into further discussion? Great, thank you. All right, if you would like to speak, if you would, is that a sign-up sheet up on the table? If you wouldn't mind signing up there, and I'll give you a couple minutes to put your names on there, and then I can read them off. How many people are here to speak, if you want to just raise your hand? 1? Okay. Great. If you'd like to just go ahead to the microphone now, if you're the only one, we can get your name down. Thanks. Wow, that's really long.
My name is Joanne Van Derzen, and I've never been to anything like this before, but I go up to Swedish Hospital in that area every day, and I go walking. And my concern is the cutting of the trees down in that entire area and the widening of Discovery Avenue to handle all of the traffic, because this place was built about 5 years ago with all of these roads. And you mentioned, well, before I came, I knew that 218 parking spaces would have to be provided. But you also say maximum of 441 parking places. So these tiny roads up there, 1-lane roads going this way and that way. I mean, I don't know the direction, but there's streets up there right now that are only 1 lane. So you're adding another 441 cars to this area. And my concern is I don't know if any of you people go up there during the day, during the working day, but I do every day. I'm retired, and I go up there every day walking. And there is absolutely no place to park. In the building at Swedish today, 0 parking, 0 in the basement. On the streets up there, 0 parking. And there was something that was mentioned about painting in front of the fire hydrants. Yes, that needs to be done because people will park. A parking space is a parking space. And there's also, when you come in and you make this left-hand turn where this other development is going down, there's signs up there that say no parking from the beginning of that street, which is Discovery, to that, onto that, I don't know the name of the street, but it's where the ambulances go. There's no red, no marking, no indicator. And when there's no parking, no places to park, people will park there. So that is my concern, is the cutting of the trees and Discovery Avenue. How is that going to handle another 441 cars in this new complex? Then across the street today, I was up there, and I met the construction people up there. Now, this has already been, the meeting was way back in April, and they're up there now, and they're going to start cutting trees down. They're going to start building. They're going to dump ground into this wetland. So these are my concerns about what's going on up there. The cars, the traffic. And are they going to put more stop and go lights up there? And is 7th Avenue going to come down into Discovery? So when the traffic really gets heavy, okay, we need to do like they did on Gilman. Just whack some trees down, widen the streets. In fact, I don't know which development, if it's this one or the one across the street, but there's all of these signs that say clear zone, and they're on the grass, and there's also trees in the way. So someday I'm going to go up there walking, and there's the trees gone down. So that's all I have to say. Oh, one more thing. You have 218 cars minimum, and you have 441 maximum. And how many ADA parking spaces do you have to allow? 1 or 2 or 3 or an allocated 2 for each building. So I don't have anything else to say.
Thank you, Joanne. Appreciate your comments. Okay. Is there anybody else that would like to speak tonight? One final request. Seeing none, we're going to go ahead and close the public comment portion of this evening's meeting. We will open it up again at the next meeting. Would anybody like to respond, the applicant or the city, to anything that's been said tonight?
I think we'll wait and respond in the briefing response.
Perfect. Thank you.
Ms. Van Dusen, do you live at Kelkari and you dropped off the information to me? Yes. Okay. You don't need to sign the sign-in sheet.
Okay.
We've got all your contact information.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, well, at this time, I'd like to open this up for commission discussion. Make sure that we get out whatever questions and comments we have so that they can bring it back to the briefing next time.
I have a real minor question. Mike or Lucy might be able to answer this. In the packet, there's reference to resident feedback on page 8 that said there was 4 resident feedback, and later in the document on page 35, there's 2.
Yeah.
Maybe that was just a
It's
typo or...
We had one resident that rescinded her comments. She actually had comments and then was supportive of the project and requested that those be rescinded. And then the other one it was just a gentleman that asked to be a party of record. He didn't actually have comments. So that was the confusion. We have 4 parties of record, but we only have 2 comments that were submitted. But good catch, thank you.
That's a good catch, yeah.
And then this is just a real administrative question, it may be a point that gets handled outside of this commission. But in terms of the ongoing maintenance of a subdivision like this, where we've got a park and some pretty substantial landscaping and other efforts, is this the HOA of all of Issaquah Highlands? It is a subdevelopment HOA? Is it the city? Where is the maintenance managed, and is that part of this discussion, or is this handled elsewhere?
Great question. Typically, especially in the Issaquah Highlands, in most instances, the Issaquah Highlands Community Association maintains the landscape. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that ultimately is an agreement between the property owner and the IHCA. But at the end of the day, one or the other has to accept responsibility. The city is not going to accept responsibility for maintenance of the private areas. For the public streets, which in this project will be the perimeter streets, the subcollector ones, those would be dedicated right-of-way. So the city would maintain those, not the landscape, but the infrastructure is maintained by the city. The IHCA does deal with the streetscape.
And the park is not a city park, it's a community
Yeah, that'll be a
park.
private park,
Okay.
but it'll be public access. There'll be an easement across the park so that the public can use it, but it's privately owned and maintained.
Okay, thank you.
Is this the play area park?
Yes.
Right, I have just a suggestion. I'm not sure if it falls within the, within our area, but I saw the chess game, which I think is cool, but I would like to see something more interactive, more inclusive, more inviting to more than maybe 1 or 2 people that might be playing a game. Something that would invite more people, maybe pick up, or something that would just allow like someone to walk in and join. That's just a suggestion.
Great, thank you.
I just wanted to make a comment about, I live in the Brownstones, which is another Polygon property, if you know where they are, over near Dick's Sporting Goods, and we have a separate HOA that is responsible for taking care of our grounds and everything.
But you also still pay your IHCA dues on top of that, right? Yeah. Okay. So I noticed there was one comment that someone had sent via email regarding connecting Ellis Drive to High Street. I just want to throw out my support of actually that connection happening, because I think it's really important for the circulation of the community that we don't isolate anybody. Just certainly no offense to anybody that lives in these blocks, but we're all in this together, and we need to have the best circulation possible and not just have dead end streets because somebody doesn't want cars going to or through their community unless there's an extremely good reason for it, and I don't think there is one here. So personally.
Thanks.
What other questions and comments?
Yeah, I have a question. I didn't get to this when you were doing some of the circulation work, and maybe it's addressed and I didn't catch it, Mike. Emergency vehicle access, is it also through the, I've forgotten its name, I've said it so many times, but the fancy pedestrian area, I'll just call it that.
The feature pedestrian way?
Feature pedestrian way, yeah. Does that include bollards or something for emergency access, or how do you work that?
This has been reviewed by East Side Fire and Rescue by the Assistant Fire Marshal. So while the alleys are not intended to provide primary access, we are having them build the fire emergency alley, which is the same one that's in Brownstone, so the fire vehicles can get through there, as well as the character streets. I don't believe that emergency services are intended to be provided on the feature pedestrian way, though in a pinch I don't know that much about that piece right now. I think the fire can adequately serve the project without it, if that helps.
And by the way, speaking of kudos for putting this together, kudos for doing this with accompaniment most of the time. Well done.
Thanks.
I have a question that may not actually have an answer, but I found that there was this recurring theme and I'm going to use an example of being the bike storage. So right now, the map that showed where bike storage would be is kind of on one end of the community, and I was kind of like, I'm curious why it's not a few more stations centered throughout. And it looks like there's reference several times through, applicant says, well, most people are going to put their bikes in their garages, so we don't need to have storage throughout. Then this kind of came up the same with garbage cans. Well, there's not really going to be space for garbage cans. Everybody's going to have 3 cans, but they're going to need that space in the garage. Well, we don't really have the dimensions yet, but there's these, we keep alluding to where things are going without a reference to the fact that there's a place for them. And I guess my question is a little more vague, where I'm like, is there this notion of this kind of these tying together elements of a community, a place for garbage cans, a place for bicycles, seem to be a little hazy. So I guess kind of goes, I know this is back to my like conditions comment, but.
I really appreciate that comment. I think to answer the part about the garbage cans, I think if you hunt deep enough into the construction conditions, that is a condition. I think that falls under one of the more boilerplate type of conditions, but the way we address that is at building permit. On the building permit drawings, which I as a planner will review, I have them depict the actual refuse cans in addition to the vehicle's standard vehicle. At the end of the day, we require them to put their cans in the garage, or at least have enough room to do that and park a vehicle. That answers that one. For the bicycle storage, this isn't necessarily a public facility, so to expect a big bike barn or something, obviously that doesn't make sense here. I think your comment about providing multiple bike racks throughout the project makes sense. I think in the drawings they showed a couple at the park, and then I believe there's one shown at the pedestrian nodes. Point well taken. I think that they should have bike parking throughout the project, and that's certainly something that we'll be making sure they provide with the construction permits.
I have to say that I thought the same thing when I saw that. I felt like the bike placement was sort of just like, we'll stick it over here, and not really like an integrated, thoughtful placement. So I felt the same way.
Jeff, I've got a comment.
Yeah, go for it.
I can talk over the background singing.
Iron Maiden.
All right, here we go. Page 14 of 81. First paragraph. Currently, the applicant does not plan to develop the project as depicted in phases. However, it is possible that the site could be completed in phases. Perhaps I missed it, but I don't recall any conversation or visibility in regards to proposed timeline of this effort.
I think I would refer that question to the applicant.
Repeat it, please.
I don't recall seeing any details in regards to the proposed timeline for initiate and complete. Is there a ballpark target that we're talking about here?
Yeah, I think, we'll go through your process, of course, and then with staff, the utility permit or the site work permit, which let's throw 2 months from now, 3 months. I don't want to stick Lucy and Dan, but we want to begin immediately. In our world, we're actually feeling quite behind. We wanted to transition from the Brownstone project into this one, but we're going to have a pretty significant gap. And then, short of the sky falling, we'll proceed straight through the project, just like we have done with the Brownstone project.
Okay.
So that's the intent. I think phasing is really talking about if we get to a point where we want to open a model and have the sales start, a certain amount of utilities need to be complete and operational. And so we might want to propose drawing a line on the plan so that we say, okay, well, this half of the project can now safely serve a sales environment and maybe the first couple of buildings that we would sell. And then the second half of the project could be, from a utility aspect or life safety, completed at, just on paper at a different time. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Great. Thank you.
I saw, this is just a typo I saw on page 15. I don't know if you want to, page 15 of 81. The sixth bullet point, it says the short plan must be formally approved. I think that should be plat. Sorry, I just happened to see
Is
that.
it a condition?
Under permit history?
Yeah.
15.
Oh, 15, sorry.
I saw it.
You got it, okay.
20.
It's
Flat out air, but it's planned.
Then I have to wonder, do we pay ASCAP BMI fees for this music that's going to be?
reproduce,
We're
yeah.
recording this right now. Okay, any other comments or questions at this time? We didn't really talk about the park at all. You guys want to get into that discussion now, or do you want to have that discussion when we see a more sort of
Maybe
fully developed plan next time?
Details around at least the high-level vision, so we can have a general understanding, provide feedback, and then in turn see what they bring forward via our next discussion would be helpful.
Well, we've gotten, Tara provided some comments. I think it's helpful to us if you have, I'm not asking you to make stuff up, but if you have thoughts or comments or questions, it's always helpful because then we have a chance to put something together for you to get ahead of time. So please feel free to share it if you have something.
I mean, I always go back to the first park that was in the neighborhood. And in my neighborhood, what the heck is it called?
Ashland Park.
Ashland Park with the spire. And, you know, the water feature was great and, you know, sort of not maintained for a while, but then maintained again. The grass was not maintained for a while, then maintained again. So when it's in good shape, it's a great facility. It's probably bigger than what we're talking about here, I think, right?
No.
Is it or
it's
similar in
probably
size?
about the same.
Okay.
Village Green is an acre too, so.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, it's a good-sized piece of land, so I do love having the passive, open opportunities, but also some things that bring people in to actually do some things. I think climbing rocks and, you know, I just love watching the kids just sort of make up their own stuff and not be too structured. That's my personal opinion, but I wanted to, I love the idea of the street bench, or the benches and so forth, but that it's well maintained. That's the main thing, is if it's too passive and there's not much to do there, then oftentimes those things tend to fall into disrepair pretty easily, and I'd hate to see that happen.
I would like to add to that, as a resident of Tallis, one of the things that we notice is that the small community parks within the subdivisions tend to be the informal, impromptu gathering point for the residents, whether it's for National Night Out or Halloween costume parades or 4th of July barbecues or whatever it is. But having this open area and leaving it, a fair amount of it open, yet having an infrastructure, whether it's picnic tables or benches or something, I think will be quite well used by residents in this particular location where you've got really tight housing.
I was going to make a comment about picnic tables and benches. Ashland Park really didn't have hardly anything there. And I think of the, you know, benches that I have along in front of our house, and we ran across a little corner that's got the Adirondacks overlooking, things like that, or, you know, nice little surprises, and reasonably well used. So I think that's an element to parks, and probably, you know, the play structures, kids tend to outgrow and move on, but they still get used as well and draw a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with you as far as the not too structured, something that invites play but doesn't sort of dictate play. So you could have like a small amphitheater where people could meet and maybe play, but not constructed. And so that's just my thoughts.
A small hill that they can tear up when there's five flakes of snow has always
Yeah,
been popular
that's
too.
great.
Yeah.
Best sledding hill in town.
And is this park
You're
facing the west? So the opposite side of the roadway is trees, or what's,
It'll be single-family homes in the
single-family
future.
homes on the opposite side? Okay.
And, you know, one of the points that you all touched on is one that I think we like to think about, which is it's not only giving kids opportunities to, you know, grow and change and not get tired of how they play on something, because it can be used in a lot of different ways. But also, you know, a big toy is really just for kids, and the adults don't use it. And but a hill that an adult can sit on and a kid can roll down can be used by everybody. And so, you know, we do try and look at those things that can be used by all ages in lots of different ways, so that whether a neighborhood is kid-heavy or adult-heavy, it's, you know, it's meeting everybody's needs.
Right.
You should see me on a jungle gym.
You see him roll down a hill.
I still love a good swing. I don't know what you're
Yeah,
talking
me
about.
too.
But But I like the direction that you're going with being inclusive to multiple ages and variety of people, so.
Right. Well,
Richard,
did you have something else, Richard? Sorry.
Respond a little bit. Well, two things.
You have to change this.
Just in terms of the park itself, it's probably not really clear at that conceptual level, but what we envision is something that has a couple of very strong elements, like the lawn. We've heard from folks that it was at West Highlands Park. Remember during our last SDP or plat, that a couple came up and said, you know, we really would love a place where we can go and throw the ball with, you know, the kids or let the dog run. And we're really happy to see some stretch, you know, in addition to having the smaller or just different, more programmed activity areas. So, I mean, we're committed to doing a structure there, you know, a nice picnic structure that's got some serious size to it. So you could have, you know, 6 or 8 picnic tables under it, and then an expansive, you know, not just a slab at the structure, but something that extends out and maybe turns into more of an outdoor gathering area where folks could set different things up on the 4th of July or, you know, do whatever. So just trying to give you a little bit of flavor. We're in a, the second point I wanted to make is this is kind of central. I don't know if we want to pull it up, but to the 4 communities that we're building there, 2 single-family and 2 townhome communities. And so we're kind of looking at this as that big opportunity. The other communities have some smaller or medium-sized activity areas. And so we think this is kind of going to work in concert with and provide some of the things that you know, wouldn't necessarily get in the community at the south there behind the hospital, or potentially along those yellow lots along the left side along the rim. So our park, in this particular, we're going to build it now, you know, but our programming is envisioning it's available not only just for our communities, but the parcels that are remaining along the perimeter, which will likely have a higher intensity use, and it may involve people who are on a lunch break, or, you know, so we're kind of throwing all that stuff into the programming mix. You know, I kind of expected to hear a little bit more back, frankly, on the park, and that's great. We have the luxury this time of not being back for a month, I think, for the second meeting. So normally it'd be 2 weeks, and so I think we could develop that much further. And you know, our goal, of course, at the next meeting is to have you say, hey, we like where you're going. Conceptually, we're on board, but we can certainly provide a better program and some more detail for the next meeting, and I think you'd be very happy with it.
Great. Thank you very much.
I'm going to throw out my 2 cents on that. Since it's west facing, I think you can see some nice sunsets as well, so maybe some benches with backs along that far west end.
I don't mean to ruin the good park vibe, but since we're closing, I'd be remiss not to mention a feeling that I got when reading this document. When we talk about planning for the future, I couldn't help but notice that we're not meeting vertical maximums, that we're not meeting density. We still have space to build. This is a nice chunk of land, and throughout the document you see that we could go higher, we could be bigger, we could be putting in more people into this space, and we could also, there's a mention about diversity programs, but there isn't a direct link to affordable housing for this plot. And while I don't see it as being something that needs to change, I would like to mention that I was hoping to have this be a little more robust as far as the needs of our community for the size that it is.
Thank you.
One thing that might be, thank you, helpful, Issaquah Highlands Development Agreement, I think we've learned a lot since we wrote it. That's what he meant, I think. But one of the things I'd say is that each development area or each parcel had a minimum and a maximum. And it's not like traditional zoning where if you have an acre and it's 5,000 square foot zoning, then you divide an acre by 5,000 and you get X number of lots. With Issaquah Highlands, you buy a piece of property and then you have to buy the entitlement. And without the entitlement, you just have a piece of property. And so at this point in the development, all the entitlement's gone. So you're right, we have a minimum, and they are meeting the minimum, and there's a maximum, and it's way higher. And the idea was not that every parcel be built to the maximum, because there wasn't enough entitlement for all of that. But it was to ensure that there was a mixture and a diversity of densities and price points throughout the community. But, I mean, you have identified one of the things we kind of learned along the way. Issaquah Highlands has built their affordable housing requirements. They were required to build 325 affordable housing units at certain price points. And the YWCA Family Village was on top of that, and that's another 147 units or some scary number that's in my head. And, but, we're aware that that is an outstanding question, that the community can always benefit from more affordable housing as housing prices go up in this region.
Thank you, Lucy.
Yeah, I agree with you, and thank you for that clarification. But I think we need more senior housing, for example, up in Issaquah Highlands. But it's the total of the community of Issaquah Highlands as opposed to each individual plat or development project. I'm of the mind that I don't care what the maximum is, if it's not right based on the infrastructure, parking, traffic, whatever, even if it's allowable, it doesn't necessarily mean it's smart or right. That said, we can see really good projects that do maximize their opportunity, whether it's entitlements or space or whatever it happens to be. And we have seen that throughout different parts of the Highlands over the years. I just think in total, the balance is sort of there. I still think we're missing the commercial or non-residential side of the balance. It's still being tipped too far, in my opinion. So I wouldn't even want to see more growth, even if it's affordable housing necessarily, because I still think we're tipping too far to the residential. But that's my personal opinion, and it doesn't affect this plat. So, all right. Anything else? Okay. So, other business? Any announcements?
You guys elected officers last time, right?
We elected officers last time.
Some slacker got it.
Somehow I'm in the seat again for I don't know how long.
No, I think that's all of our business unless
That's
you have
it.
any other
And then
questions
Carl's
for
the
us.
vice chair, by the way. Yeah, thank you. Well, if there's nothing else, then we will go ahead and adjourn the meeting at 8:54.
And our next meeting's July
July
19th.
July 19th. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.